Hi, this is Chris Colson from Visago Software Consulting. Today I'm going to show you how to set up Forms Based Authentication, or FBA, for SharePoint 2016. So first thing we have to do is set up the database that's going to store all the usernames and passwords for Forms Based Authentication. So .NET actually includes a little utility to create that database. You can find it under C Windows, Microsoft.NET, Framework 64, V403319, and it's just called ASP.NET Reg SQL. Here it is here. Okay. So we'll configure SQL Server for application services. Right now, my SQL Server is running on the same box as SharePoint. So if your SQL Server is a different machine, you'd have to change that there. But for me, this is okay, and we'll just use Windows Authentication and leave the database as default, which will create a database called ASP.NET DB. Okay, that's all there is to it. So now, if we open up SQL Server, we should be able to see this database. Okay, here it is here. So one thing though is that SharePoint by default won't actually have permissions to access this database yet. So we're going to have to give SharePoint permissions. So the first thing is to find out what user SharePoint's running as. So you can just look at the application pool in IIS for that. So if you just go under Administrative Tools, IIS Services, we'll just go under Application Pools and find what SharePoint's running as. So SharePoint 80 and the identity. In this case, is just the local administrator of this machine. So, and depending on how you have the security set up, you might actually have different application pools, possibly for different SharePoint web applications you have set up. So in those cases, you'd have to add them all separately. But yeah, for now, we'll just add this one. So here we'll go into Security and SQL Server, Logins. And actually, I've already got the user set up here. If it's a different user, you'd have to do a new login first and punch in the login name. But since I've already got this user, all we have to do is go into user mapping. And you'd go into ASP.NET DB, you'd check this box and check DB owner. Now, this just happens to already be done because we created the database using this same user ID, but that's not, always the case. Sometimes, a lot of the time, you'll have different service accounts running on SQL Server and running SharePoint. So you just have to make sure that that user is added into SQL Server, and then under user mapping, they're mapped to ASP.NET DB, and DB owner is checked off. Okay, so now the database is all set up. So next thing we have to do is we have to configure the membership providers, which is pretty much just the configuration that tells SharePoint how to find these forms-based users, where the database is, what kind of rules you want. So So generally the membership provider settings go in the web config. Now what I always do is I actually put it in the machine config, because that way the single membership provider setup is available for every web application on the SharePoint farm. So it eases, setup in the future, because you don't have to continually edit web configs every time you make a change, add a new web application, that sort of thing. So the machine config is under C Windows, Microsoft.NET, Framework 64, v403319 under config here. And here's the machine config right here. Now, I'm going to make a backup of this, because occasionally you can make a typo, and if you do, well, by changing, this is the settings for all of the .NET applications on your machine. So if you make a typo here, you can potentially break a lot of stuff. So don't make any typos, but just in case you do, have a backup of it, and then you can just delete your changes and go back to what it was before, and then yeah, try again. So let's open this up. Let's do an open with instead here, and just choose Notepad. Okay, so here it is. So first thing we have to do is add in a connection string to that database. So I'm just going to search for connection string. It's the first one. Okay, here's the connection string settings. So it's already got a built-in one to SQL Server Express. So now we have to add a new one for this database we just created, this ASP.NET DB. So I've actually got a little text file here with all these magic strings, with the connection strings and configurations. So I'm just going to copy and paste it from there. I'm going to put all this on my blog. I'll leave a link to that in the description. So when you go to do that, you can just copy and paste from the blog. Okay, so here it is. So all it's saying is, here's the server name. So this is the local server for me. You just change that to whatever you need to be. Database name, ASP.NET DB. Integrated security equals true, which means we're just going to connect with the Windows authentication. And then it's just a name for this connection string for when other configurations refer to this. So this is just called FBA DB. Okay, so that's done. Okay, next thing we're going to do is configure the membership provider. So I'm just going to search for membership. There you go, and yeah, they've already got one built in. This is to that SQL Express database we saw earlier, so we just have to create our own here. And I'll just copy and paste. Okay, so there we go. You can see we're connecting to the FBA DB, and then we've got a bunch of different options that you can set depending on how you want your forms-based authentication to behave. So enable password retrieval equals false. Generally, yeah, that's a bad thing, a security concern. It's not usually something you want to enable. You don't want the users to be able to get their passwords back, because that means that the passwords are recoverable from the database, which you generally don't want. Just, in case you get hacked or whatever, it's yeah, best that the passwords aren't recoverable. So yeah, instead you just let them reset their password to something new. So yeah, and that's the next one, enable password reset. Yeah, we'll let them do that. Requires question and answer. This is a built-in function for checking their identity. Now I disable it because if the way this is set up, if they forget the answer to their question, there's not much that can be done to retrieve it, apart from deleting their account and recreating it. So I just leave that as false. Okay, application name. This generally, most cases you can just leave it to slash. You use this if you want to use that same ASP.NET DB to store different groups of usernames and passwords. So, for example, if you have 5 different web applications and you want to have separate user lists for each of them, one user might be in 3 of the 5 applications, and but it would all be with separate. They could have separate passwords, that sort of thing. It's just a way to break out the groups in the database. So generally, you just use the one database for storing the one list of usernames and passwords. So usually this is just fine. Requires unique email. That just prevents duplicate users from being created. So that should generally be true. Okay, password format. There's 3 values here. You can use either hashed, clear, or encrypted. So clear means it's just the password is just stored in the database without any type of encryption or anything. Anybody who has access to the database can read your user's password. So generally you don't want that. Password format encrypted is what, if you wanted to enable password retrieval, you could use that format, because so then the passwords aren't easily readable, but it uses the machine key to encrypt and decrypt the password, so the passwords are retrievable. So they're not 100% safe. So I generally recommend the password format of hashed, which means the passwords actually aren't recoverable. It's like a one-way encryption, essentially. So when you enter the user's password for the first time, it gets hashed to this one-way encrypted key, and then when a user goes to enter their password on the site, that also gets hashed, and then the hashed values are compared. So so the original password is generally not retrievable, in this case. So that's why I always recommend using that password format. Okay, max invalid password attempts. This is how many times a user can attempt to log in before they're locked out. And that goes along with this password attempt window of 10, which is the number of minutes between invalid attempts. So if they, let's say, make 4 invalid attempts, then after 10 minutes, that counts is reset to 0. So they can continue to attempt again, after that time period without locking out their account. Okay, and then password lengths. So in this case, there's a minimum required password length of 7. You can change that to whatever value you want. And then also required non-alphanumeric characters. So in this case, you also need a non-alphanumeric character such as an exclamation mark or a $sign or something like that in the password for it to be valid. And then additionally, you can provide a regular expression. Instead of using these values with number of alphanumeric characters, you could provide a regular expression to validate the user's passwords to make sure they fit with your corporation's rules. Okay, so that's it for the membership provider. Now we have to add the role provider. So let me copy that in here. There's no real settings for this. The only thing, it just tells it that it's using the FBA DB database connection string that we set up earlier. Okay, that's it. So let's save that. So now by putting this in the machine config, all the web configs actually inherit these values. So now you can use these membership providers, like we call this FBA membership provider. We call this FBA role provider. So we can use these anywhere else in the machine now. Now, one thing too, if you have multiple SharePoint servers, and you probably do, you have to do these changes on every single server. Okay, so now, as much as these settings are inherited, unfortunately, there's one place where SharePoint actually breaks that inheritance. And so you do have to put it there as well. That's in the security token service application. This is pretty much what's used to log in a user. So you definitely need the settings there. So we'll just explore that. It's under SharePoint Web Services and IIS Security Token Service Application. We're going to explore that. There's the web config for it. Okay. And so yeah, we'll just add a section with the membership provider and role provider at the end there. Okay. So now that's all set up on the machine. You can close that. Actually, I should have backed this up as well, which I did not, but you should do that before you go and edit this as well, so you have something to go back to. Okay, next thing you need to do is go into SharePoint Central Admin. Let's open this up here. And you have to actually tell the web application that you're using that you want to use Forms Based Authentication. So let's just go into this. Okay, here we go. So just click on the web application we want to configure. Just click on Authentication Providers. Okay, so we'll click on the default authentication provider. And we're going to enable forms-based authentication. So when we do this, what this is going to do is when you log in, instead of just automatically logging you in with Windows Authentication, you're going to get a drop-down that's going to ask if you want to log in with Windows or log in with a forms-based authentication. So Another way you can do it is by actually extending the web application and adding a separate zone, in which case you'd have two items under the authentication providers. And one, you could just enable Windows authentication. So that would be like if you accessed it through your local network URL just with the machine name, and then a second one which might be SharePoint.mycompany.com, and on there you'd only enable the forms-based authentication, and then it would just come up with a login screen immediately, instead of having this this drop down to choose what type of authentication you want. But for this example, we'll just do them both under the same zone. So all we have to do is put in the membership provider name and role manager name that we put in the machine config. So it was FBA membership provider and FBA role provider. That's it. Let's save that and wait again a long time. Okay, there we go. So now that shall be set up. Now if we go to our actual site, so if we sign out, now we should get the new authentication window that actually asks us what type of authentication we want to use to connect. Well, I'm not sure why the sign out doesn't seem to be completing properly. So let me just open the site up in an in-private browsing window. And that'll be the exact same as signing out, because all the cookies and that would be deleted. Okay. Let's give that a try. There we go. So now we get the sign-in page that asks us if we want Windows or forms-based authentication. I mean, we could choose forms-based authentication right now. The only issue is we don't actually have any usernames or passwords set up, so there's nothing to log in with. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to choose Windows authentication for now. There we go. Okay, so now we actually have to add users to this database. The way I like to do it is using our tool called the SharePoint 2016 FBA pack. So you can just download that from SharePoint 2016 FBA.codeplex.com. I'll put the link in the description. So I've already got it downloaded on my machine. I'll just show you how to set it up right now. So I've got it here in C, deploy. I've already unzipped it. Just got some scripts for adding and removing it to SharePoint. So these are PowerShell scripts. So let's just run that from PowerShell. I've got an open window here. I'm actually using the SharePoint 2016 management shell, but you can just use a standard PowerShell window as well, just running as administrator. So let's go back here, deploy. Okay. And I'm going to run deploy with the URL of the site collection. And so that will actually activate the FBA pack on this site collection. You can run deploy just by itself as well. Then you have to go into site settings, site collection features, and activate it manually. So I'll just do this, which will activate it for us. Okay, there we go. It's been added. So now we can go into site settings and go and manage the users and add a user that we can log in with. There we go, site settings. Okay, so here's site settings. So now we can just go into FBA user management. Okay, and we'll just create a new user. Okay, let's call this FBA user. Give it a password, at least 7 characters long with 1 non-alphanumeric character. Email address, just gonna make this up. Okay, and let's add them to a group so they can actually access the site. We won't send an email since it's not a real email address, and just add that user. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now let's log in as that user. Let's see if the sign out works this time. Okay, this looks a little bit better anyways, telling us to close the browser, so sure, why not? And go back into a new in private browser window. Access it again. Sign in this time with Forms Authentication. And FBA user, password. Sign in. Okay, there we go. So we've logged in successfully with this FBA user, and SharePoint's all set up for forms-based authentication. So if you have any questions, you can just post it to my blog article on setting this up, and I'll put the link in the description. Okay, thank you.